When I moved to Seattle over a decade ago, one of the first things I did was go buy a pair of hiking boots at REI. Becoming a co-op member was almost a rite of passage, a badge that made me a true Seattleite. The joke is, you know you're from Seattle if you don't get your coffee at Starbucks, don't use an umbrella in the rain because you have the perfect rain jacket for the season, and are an REI co-op member. All that to say, it is funny how Seattleites look down at Starbucks as a corporate evil and yet flock to REI as though it is a local small business or the holy shrine of outdoor gear. REI's employees are what have made it my personal go-to for outdoor needs. I know that if I need anything from the perfect hiking pack to the most efficient backpacking stove, I can go to REI and there will be an employee there who can help me navigate details I didn't even think about. Not too long ago, I spent 45 minutes talking to an employee about all the possible ways to avoid mosquito bites during an upcoming trip. REI's branding as a community-centered cooperative makes you feel good about shopping there, even for people like me who spend a considerable amount of time thinking about corporate accountability. But behind REI's glossy green sheen and feel-good messaging, REI workers are fighting a different battle, one for fair wages, safe working conditions, and the right to unionize without retaliation. Since 2022, REI employees across the country have been unionizing, demanding that the company live up to the values it so proudly markets. But the company's response? Union-busting law firms, unfair labor practices, and active suppression of workers' organizing. All of this while continuing to sell a vision of an environmentally thoughtful, community-focused business. According to Article 23 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right to just and favorable conditions of work and to protection against unemployment. It also states that everyone, without discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work and to form and join trade unions for the protection of their interests. So when companies say they care about human rights, we need to ask them, which human rights? Human rights are not a menu you can pick from. They are fundamental rights and freedoms that belong to every individual. These rights are inherent, inalienable, and considered universal, meaning they apply to all people equally and cannot be taken away arbitrarily. In today's episode, we're opting outside by centering REI's labor fight. I'm joined by Emma Harris, a bike and ski shop technician at REI SoHo store in New York City. As a member of REI Union SoHo, she serves as an elected member of the Union Bargaining Committee and is part of the store's contract action team. Together, we will pull back the progressive corporate veil and unpack the ways in which REI has been undermining its mission and worker power. We will also discuss the role of unions and the challenges workers face when they come together to unionize. This podcast is about confronting power and explores what real accountability should look like. At the end of the day, if a company sells itself as caring about people and the planet, should its employees really have to go on strike just to secure basic workplace safety?
My name is Emma. I use she, her pronouns. I have been working at REI for about 5.5 years now. I first started there when I was in college, part-time. And then about 3.5 years ago, I moved to New York and transferred to the Soho store. And now I'm a bike and ski shop mechanic there. And shortly after I transferred to the Soho store, I got brought in on the super secret underground talks of unionization. And it's been a wild ride since then. So I was lucky enough to be a part of the campaign from pretty close to when it started taking off, and have been there throughout all of the ups and downs and the crazy roller coaster that has come since then.
A union is a group of coworkers who come together to negotiate a contract collectively with their employer over working conditions, wages, and benefits, a process called collective bargaining. The workers of the REI flagship store in Soho, New York City, have organized a union under the banner of REI Union SoHo, with the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union referred to as RWDSU. The REI Union currently consists of workers who have unionized at 11 REI retail stores across the country, with Soho being the first store to unionize in March 2022.
The biggest push to really begin organizing in a real way was the pandemic. During the pandemic, obviously in lockdown, the stores closed, everybody was furloughed, and coming back, they started kind of slowly reopening the stores, bringing back essentially like kind of a skeleton crew to run just curbside pickup, and then slowly work their way back towards getting back to full capacity in terms of staffing. But they never really returned to full capacity, and a ton of people got laid off rather than being brought back after the pandemic. So that was kind of the impetus for really starting to take steps. And there was a small group of employees who met in Washington Square Park in New York City, and we're like, how do we actually make this happen? We've been talking about this, but how do we actually go forward with this? We're looking at things like layoffs post-pandemic, health and safety post-pandemic. How do we protect ourselves in the workplace? How do we protect ourselves returning to public spaces? What is REI's role in protecting us there? So that was kind of the big push at the beginning. And then that small group of people started talking to different unions, reaching out. Who do we want to represent us? What feels like the best fit? And then started to grow more and more to involve more of the workforce and to continue to try and bring in as many people as possible and just build that collective power within the store so that we could go public with the union and be as much of a united front as possible.
Throughout history, unions have been a tool to counter the power dynamics between workers and employers. However, in the United States, union membership has declined immensely in the past few decades. Sustained trade union organizing among American workers began in 1794 with the establishment of the first trade union by Philadelphia shoemakers. Industrialization created an environment that necessitated labor organizing. It concentrated workers in large factories, providing a strong foundation for union growth. It wasn't until 1935 that workers in the U.S. were granted the right to unionize under the Wagner Act.
It very much started motivated by wanting greater protections and health and safety in the workplace. But also coming back post-pandemic, we saw a lot of policies and benefits that workers had had pre-pandemic were being rescinded with the quote unquote unprecedented times. Like we used to have essentially guaranteed minimum hours as like a good faith hours commitment. And that was taken away post-pandemic. So there was a lot of other benefits and policies that were part of what made working at REI so great that were rolled back. And now, since we're in this post-pandemic world, have not been reintroduced. It's been a bit of like a mask off to see how they really feel and how they really care about their employees. And it's been pretty disappointing.
Union membership and power peaked in the 1940s and 1950s, when 1 in 3 American workers belonged to a union. Fast forward to 2021, only 1 in 10 workers belong to unions. Legislation such as the Taft-Hartley Act and Right to Work laws have made organizing more difficult and given companies greater ability to resist unionization. Collective bargaining has allowed unions to secure fair wages, benefits, safe working conditions, and a voice in decisions that impact the entire organization.
All of us are very experienced, and that's part of the appeal of REI is that all of our workers are super knowledgeable and can really educate you on these things so that the outdoors really is for all. And it is supposed to take away that barrier of entry of not knowing what to get. Our wage doesn't reflect that at all. And that's something that in other industries outside of retail is something that's like greatly considered. It's every time you're looking at like salary ranges, it's based on your experience and your expertise. And then at REI, since it's a retail environment, that is not taken into consideration.
The Department of the Interior oversees public and federal lands and their natural resources. It also oversees the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the National Park Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. Earlier this year, REI signed onto an open letter endorsing Doug Burgum, the former governor of North Dakota and Trump's nominee for Secretary of the Interior. The letter was championed by Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, a coalition of outdoor recreation associations representing outdoor businesses. Note, the keyword, businesses. Burgum's appointment is deeply problematic due to his strong pro-oil stance and aggressive deregulatory agenda, which threatens public lands, wildlife, and climate protections. As a staunch supporter of expanded oil and gas drilling, Burgum has wasted no time increasing drilling on public lands, rolling back climate protections, and reducing accountability for mining companies that harm wildlife. His approach aligns with the Trump administration's drill baby drill philosophy, ignoring the Department of the Interior's broad responsibility to safeguard national parks, monuments, and endangered species. His willingness to redraw the boundaries of all public lands currently protected from fossil fuel and mining development signal a troubling shift towards greater corporate exploitation of federal lands and natural resources. Feeding on Trump's quote-unquote energy crisis, Burgum's leadership threatens to erode decades of environmental progress.
It's an interesting perspective. They have the privilege of flip-flopping and trying to protect their public image as a progressive and sustainable company. In reality, they're also supporting this nomination that is jeopardizing public lands. And there's a former Exxon executive on the board and all of these things that just go directly against their stated values.
Labor activism in the United States has experienced a significant resurgence over the past 3 years and is being led by young people. Workers have launched successful organizing efforts across industries, from Amazon to Ben & Jerry's to REI. Public support for unions has also reached historic levels, with Gallup polls indicating that 70% of Americans and nearly 90% of young workers approve of unions, a level not seen since the 1960s. Despite this increase in momentum and proven success of worker-led movement efforts, increased labor activism has not translated into greater union density because of two primary reasons, according to an article published by the Economic Policy Institute. 1, deeply flawed labor laws, and 2, relentless corporate resistance to worker organizing.
The biggest challenge at the point when I was brought on was, how do we reach as many people as possible while also protecting the kind of secrecy of a union drive before it goes public? Because when you're forming a union, especially as the first store to do it, we really had to stay underground to make sure that we had the protection of filing for a union election before the company found out, so that we had that legal backing and protection from retaliation, because it's a lot more difficult to claim retaliation when there isn't that actual kind of more tangible documentation that the effort was really moving forward. And we also wanted to make sure A huge tenet of our organizing through the entire process has been we don't do anything without a supermajority or a majority. So we really wanted to make sure that we were as solid as possible going forward with the filing process, because we knew that REI was going to be caught off guard and they were going to be giving us everything that they've got in terms of union busting. So we had to be as secure and as united as possible so that we could move forward and be strong and confident and trust each other and trust the union. But also, as the first store to unionize, a big challenge was also just education. I personally knew next to nothing about unions before being brought in. So I kind of had to have the entire process explained to me. Why do we want a union? What is the point of a union? We're seeing a huge uprising in labor movements now, but for a long time, that was not something that a lot of the country really understood outside of the real, like, blue collar workers unions that have been kind of like the legacy unions. And now, kind of starting with Starbucks and with REI and Amazon and Trader Joe's, we're seeing a lot more like worker-led organizing in areas that haven't historically been unionized. And it's a lot of young people, and we're seeing a huge, vibrant movement now. But back in late 2021, early 2022, it was still very early days of that. So there was a lot of education and a lot of meeting people where they're at in terms of comfort level and understanding of unions and their function. So I think that was just kind of a massive hurdle to find ways to navigate, as well as pairing that with the high turnover rate of being a flagship retail store in New York City. We had a lot of short-term employees, a lot of college students, a lot of people who are just here for a paycheck. That kind of like apathy can be really difficult to get through. So again, just meeting people where they're at was our greatest strength to build solidarity and to just continue to work towards building that unified front for moving forward.
The challenge with businesses that brand themselves as community-driven and environmental stewards is that their strong public image allows them to effectively belie actions that directly contradict their stated values. By carefully crafting a narrative that positions them as responsible corporate stewards, these companies create a perception of social and environmental leadership that can obscure exploitative labor practices and union busting efforts.
REI's kind of biggest slogan, their biggest tenet of their core beliefs is that a life outdoors is a life well lived. And they have what they call the co-op way that has a bunch of different facets, like we go further together, the outdoors is for all, we courageously embrace change, all of these like really great tenets and beliefs in theory. And it's kind of shocking to see how those aren't put into practice. Most of the workers can't really afford to live a real life outdoors. And with the difficulty with scheduling, with guaranteed minimum hours, with pay, we're not able to afford the ability to go outside and to really explore and enjoy all of the wonderful, enriching things that life outdoors has to offer. And we can preach that to our customers and we can give them our best expertise and support so that they can get outside. But it's really hard and takes a toll over time to be in a position that's supporting people getting outside and going and exploring, but feeling kind of stuck and trapped and not being able to actually explore that themselves. We courageously embrace change. I feel like that could be the slogan of our union organizing, and we go further together. Those are two tenets that like we really believe in, that we go further together and we courageously embrace change, and have seen incredible resistance to those from REI. We have a ton of bad faith bargaining charges and ULPs filed. Because speaking from SoHo's experience, since REI decided to change law firms who are representing them last year in June, we have yet to receive a single tentative agreement in our contract negotiations with them. They've just been dragging their feet, trying to delay. They've insinuated that they were trying to delay contract negotiations until the election in November because they anticipated that it was going to be changing to a more employer-friendly National Labor Relations Board, and that they would be able to kind of win or avoid some of these charges. So it's been very disheartening to see their behavior in that way and to see that they're really not committed to actually making any changes. They're more committed to running out the clock and seeing who has more endurance in this fight. So that's just really, really disappointing from a company that claims to care so much about their workers and so much about the earth and sustainability. And I think that's been the huge point of our union campaign, is to hold REI accountable for their claimed values and show how we and they as a whole can actually move forward living those values.
Despite none of its unionized stores securing a collective bargaining agreement, REI maintains that it is negotiating in good faith. From June 2022 until switching law firms, REI SoHo was bargaining with REI through a different law firm and had made some tentative agreements. However, since bringing on the new law firm, progress has slowed significantly. REI's new law firm of choice, Morgan Lewis, is known for its hardline union-busting tactics and has a long history of involvement in high-profile anti-union efforts. Their dedicated labor practice dates back to the 1950s. By the 1970s, it had become the most powerful management-side labor practice in the country, frequently appearing in the largest federation of U.S. unions, AFL-CIO's, report on union busting. Their extensive experience in union avoidance has made them a prominent choice for corporations aiming to maintain non-unionized workforces. In January 2024, SpaceX, represented by none other than Morgan Lewis, filed a lawsuit against the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, introducing a new anti-union playbook. Over the past year, companies such as Amazon, Starbucks, Trader Joe's, alongside SpaceX, have intensified efforts to weaken labor rights. Beyond their usual union-busting tactics, these corporations are now actively seeking to have the entire National Labor Relations Board declared unconstitutional. Alongside REI, Morgan Lewis represents Trader Joe's, Amazon, and SpaceX. The National Labor Relations Act, passed during the height of the New Deal in 1935, enshrined the idea of workers' collective bargaining rights into federal law and created the NLRB. Under the new administration, the NLRB is in upheaval. During his first few weeks in office, Donald Trump fired the NLRB general counselor and removed a board member. While the NLRB's day-to-day work can continue, the board cannot order parties to pay remedies or recognize a union because it needs 3 members to make a ruling. With the current situation so volatile, it is likely that we will begin to see a reversal of many of the pro-labor decisions that have been issued by the board previously.
We just went through a huge strike at the Soho store with the shop technicians because REI decided to remove all of our respiratory PPE that we use when we're working on skis and snowboards in the wintertime. We're melting plastic for repairs. We're exposed to all sorts of harsh chemicals, aerosols, dust, wax, nasty things. And they decided to remove all of our PPE, which we had like half-face respirators with filters. They told us that if we wanted to use them, we would have to go out and purchase our own. We had a full set of respirators for all of our technicians, and REI rolled out this new policy and said that they were going to be disposing of them. So that's just like a ton of plastic and perfectly good PPE equipment that could have been given to their employees, could have been continued to be used over time, that was essentially just trashed.
Despite claiming the air quality tests confirmed a safe work environment, REI withheld the results for months, violating workers' legal right to access exposure data. When employees attempted to bring in an industrial hygienist for independent testing, REI denied her entry. Ski technicians are particularly vulnerable to PFAS, or toxic forever chemicals linked to cancer and other severe health issues. Research indicates that ski wax technicians have some of the highest PFAS blood levels of any profession. While REI stated it stopped using PFAS-containing ski wax in 2020, the company refused to disclose what wax it is currently using and its chemical composition. Following an OSHA citation, REI finally provided workers with chemical disclosures for ski shop products. However, one product remained missing from the chemical disclosure reports: ski wax. In a move that coincided with ongoing contract negotiations, REI revoked ski shop workers' respirators, an action that violates federal labor laws.
There was an OSHA complaint filed last year around February, just about the respirator use, because we weren't provided with any fit testing or real training around the respirators. We didn't really have any air quality information, and we weren't provided with the safety and material data sheets for the chemicals that we were using. So we were really just kind of like in the dark, didn't know what we were up against. And OSHA came in, found that REI's policies surrounding respirators were insufficient, required them to update their policy. And in that updated policy, REI claims that they no longer have to provide these respirators. The conditions are safe enough that a respirator is not necessary, so they won't be providing them. So they decided to revoke our access to them, and we had to source them ourselves if we wanted to. So we initially refused to do the service, any like ski tuning repair service, until the respirators were returned to us. And REI threatened immediate termination to all of our technicians. Not progressive discipline, not following their own policies that they have set in place about verbal warning, written warning, all of those things. It was immediate termination if we continued to be insubordinate and refuse. So we went on strike, and we were on strike for 54 days through the cold, the snow, the rain, the wind of December and January in New York, until we finally got REI to come to the table and agree to provide air quality testing by a set date. And we also partnered with an occupational health clinic to get all of our technicians fit tested for their respirators. And they were generous enough to donate the properly fitting respirators so that the employees didn't have to pay for them out of our own measly pockets. But yeah, it was enlightening to have to experience going on strike for almost 8 weeks over basic safety equipment in the workplace.
2 weeks after Emma and her coworkers went on strike, REI handed over its air quality test results. The tests, conducted on a single day in 2019, only measured total dust and paraffin wax fumes. PFAS wasn't tested.
There are lots of different kinds of strikes, and our strike actually kind of changed and evolved over time as well. So initially, we went out on a ULP, or unfair labor practice, strike because this change in policy we believed to be a violation of status quo in the workplace. So when you unionize, basically all of the policies and existing practices are kind of frozen until you get a contract, basically so that they can't revoke benefits or retaliate in that way. And this was a change in policy. So we went out on a ULP strike so that we would have job protection, so that REI could not hire permanent replacements for our positions. Our first day of the strike, was essentially kind of a general strike for the store. So we had a majority of folks who were scheduled that day walk out with us. REI continued to keep the store open with essentially a very minimal crew of managers and maybe one or two people in there. And we held it down, had the picket. It was a huge to-do, to-da. And then we had to have some tough conversations about what does this strike look like going forward. And the call was made to continue as a multi-day strike, that we wouldn't be going back to work until we had some sort of agreement with the employer to protect ourselves at work. Because in our view, it was either we go back to work and we get fired, or we go back to work and we're exposed to unhealthy working conditions, or we stay out on the picket line and hopefully come to a better conclusion. So because it was only affecting our specific department, it was just the shop folks who stayed out on strike for the whole time and were joined for support by our coworkers when they were able to. We were joined by other union organizers and activists and people who were walking by the picket line who wanted to help and support us. And we were out on strike for 54 days.
REI's principles acknowledge a commitment to environmental stewardship, responsible corporate citizenship, and maintaining an excellent workplace. When businesses position themselves as champions of sustainability and social good, many assume that commitment naturally extends to fair wages, safe working conditions, and respect for labor rights. In reality, however, this veneer of responsibility often masks a different set of priorities, one that prioritizes profit and control over genuine corporate accountability.
I have definitely experienced my fair share of union busting. Being the first store to unionize, we were kind of the punching bag. So we've gotten the brunt of a lot of the union busting efforts. The biggest overarching thing that I've seen in the store and in other stores that have unionized since Soho is that REI is really afraid of collective power, which is the whole framework that a union is. So a lot of their union busting tactics focus on siloing the workers and pulling people into individual one-on-one meetings or trying to target specific insecurities within their workplace. So I personally, early days, was pulled into a 45-minute one-on-one conversation in a teeny tiny little closet off of the sales floor that supposedly the max capacity is one person. It's where we cut rope, like climbing rope for customers. And I was in there for 45 minutes with a manager, and I was somebody who was very educated about the union. So I was able to combat all of these ridiculous things that he was saying. But somebody who maybe is not as educated or not as comfortable speaking up and fighting back might be really swayed by that. And then on a greater scale, now they're also seemingly punishing the stores that have unionized. Just after Soho won our election, they introduced a new policy across the entire company that provided pay raises for every single person in the company except for the workers at Soho. And then after our first strike, we were able to get a side letter agreement that was essentially a commitment from REI to bargain in good faith and to turn over a new leaf in bargaining to try and work towards a contract faster, where we got these raises in exchange for us not going on strike for a certain amount of time. And then after that certain amount of time, it was not set in stone that REI would rescind the raises. They just regained the right to rescind them. And the second they could, those raises got pulled. So I took a 17% pay cut because of that. And it really hurt a lot of our employees and was also really hard to message around, because it seems like that's a very demoralizing point of the union. Like, why would we want this union if all of the other people aren't unionized and they're getting this great benefit, the union must be bad. And what it really is REI exposing what they can do and will do to everybody else. As soon as it's beneficial to them, they can pull whatever they want. And the only way to actually secure these benefits and all of the things that are good about working at REI is to have them forever set in stone in a contract. And then they've continued from there. They pulled merit raises. They pulled our summit pay, which is our annual bonus, essentially, based on how well the co-op is doing. And all of this we've filed charges against, but just with the speed at which the NLRB moves and the speed at which REI moves, we haven't seen any movement on it. So it's really frustrating that they target these unionized stores to try and make an example of why unionizing is a bad thing and why you shouldn't do it, because if you don't, we'll give you all of these benefits that they don't get, when in reality, the union is the only way that we actually get to secure any of these things for the future.
Corporations have long relied on a playbook of union busting tactics designed to erode worker solidarity, stall organizing efforts, and ultimately weaken unions from within. A central strategy involves delaying bargaining and using time as a weapon. By dragging out negotiations and creating an environment of uncertainty, companies aim to capitalize on high employee turnover, hoping that workers become discouraged, divisions emerge, and union decertification efforts take hold. These tactics are not just about slowing progress. They are calculated moves to exhaust workers' resolve and undermine the foundation of collective organizing. Common union busting strategies include firing or retaliating against union supporters, threatening to close unionized facilities, and selectively improving wages and benefits for non-union workers while withholding them from unionized workplaces. Some employers manipulate policies to target union activists, reduce workers' hours to strip them of essential benefits, and reward workers if they oppose unionization. Pretext is a common union-busting tool where employers fabricate or exaggerate justifications to discipline or terminate pro-union workers, creating a legal cover for suppressing organizing efforts. Even after workers win their union elections, companies deploy stalling tactics during first contract negotiations, ensuring that promised protections and benefits never materialize.
January 24th, we had our 11th store officially vote yes in Greensboro, North Carolina. So we're trying to hold on to that momentum and keep pushing forward. We have no intention of slowing down, and our goal is to get as many stores unionized as possible and to continue to expand our collective power to gain more leverage and try to really get REI to the table in a real way. And through that national campaign, we are working really hard to coordinate our bargaining sessions so that we're making sure that what's being communicated at one table is the same as what's being communicated at another. Because like I said, that's another strategy for trying to silo individual stores, is they're not letting us do national bargaining. So we're bargaining all as individual stores. So there are some stores that REI will agree to one thing and other stores where they will hold out on it. So we've been able to use our national communication to unite on that front and to make sure that we are not making any changes that are taking away any power from anybody else. But we've also done demonstrations like last year in March. We actually did a march on the REI headquarters in Seattle. So we had representatives from all of our unionized stores there, all across the country. And we had a huge march to the REI headquarters where we actually set up a bargaining table outside of HQ to say, we're here, we're ready, willing, and able, we are at the table, where are you, REI?
When REI calls itself a cooperative, it means that it operates under a member-owned business model rather than a traditional publicly traded corporation. In theory, this means that the company is governed by its members, customers who pay a one-time fee to join, rather than by shareholders. REI uses a structure to differentiate itself from conventional retailers, positioning itself as a community-driven organization that reinvests profits back into the business and its members. To reaffirm this sentiment, REI describes a co-op as the people it brings together, the we.
To me, real accountability looks like actually committing to change. It looks like bargaining in good faith. It looks like a serious reevaluation of corporate priorities. It looks like centering worker and member voices in high-level decision-making.
REI markets its cooperative status as a sign of social responsibility, emphasizing community engagement and sustainability initiatives. However, while this cooperative model suggests a more democratic and values-driven approach, in practice, REI functions much like a traditional corporation, with a top-down governance structure and executive leadership making key decisions, not its members or workers. As of 2022, REI board members received an annual compensation of $125,000, with board chairs earning an additional $25,000 to $50,000. In 2023, REI reported its CEO's salary at over $2.7 million, though in previous year, total compensation exceeded $4 million. Unlike worker cooperatives, where employees have a say in management and decision-making, REI's corporate structure does not grant workers any ownership or governance power.
Right now, we have a campaign going on a national level to get union-friendly and labor-friendly candidates nominated to the board of directors. Currently, the board is a lot of We've got a former CEO of Starbucks. We've got Exxon executives. We've got Walmart, Amazon, Target, Chipotle, McDonald's, like all of these massive sort of quote unquote nasty corporations. And prior to 2005, a candidate could run for the board with signatures from 1% of REI membership, of the co-op membership. And now, post 2005, the only way for candidates to be nominated is through the nominating committee of the current board. So it's pretty much just the board gets to nominate themselves, and it's really isolated the worker and member voices from that. It's pretty much just a negative feedback loop of executives who are looking to protect the company and the bottom line and profit and all of these types of things, rather than actually focusing on the workers and what their mission is as a company. So that's our main goal right now in terms of holding them accountable with this campaign, is to actually get them to have real representation of the people that their policies affect. So right now we have 2 nominees that we've endorsed. The chief program officer from Greenpeace and former executive vice president of the AFL-CIO, Tefere Gabre, and the executive director of 350 Seattle, Shimona Moreno. So with these nominees, or hopeful nominees, we want to really focus more on bringing REI back to their roots and what they claim their values are. Having one or both of these people on the board would be huge in just having worker and member voices centered in this high-level decision-making.
Theoretically, any REI member is able to nominate themselves to run for a board seat, but bylaw changes in the early 2000s gave the existing board final say over who appears on the ballot. The board's bylaws also prohibit employees from running for board seats. REI's board of directors voting opened earlier this month on March 3rd. Not surprisingly, missing from the ballot are the names of both of the union-supported nominees.
For all of the members who are able to vote no on the REI nominated board picks, to really drive home the message that the actual people who make up the co-op, who REI loves to brand when selling memberships that you become a partial owner of the co-op when you spend $30 and buy a lifetime membership. But then when you actually become a member, REI has been slowly but surely taking away all of the power that our members actually have. And it's just become a selling point for sales and coupons, and REI gets extra money and gets to continue to claim to be a co-op. So voting no will just show REI that the members are listening and paying attention, and they care about the decisions that REI is making as a whole, both for their employees and for the world at large.
Earlier this year, Washington State House Bill 1635 was introduced, which requires any Washington-based consumer cooperative with more than 2,500 employees to reserve 2 seats on its board of directors for people who work at the co-op. In the face of aggressive resistance, sustaining and growing a union requires deep trust, strong relationships, and unwavering solidarity among workers, determined to hold corporations accountable. I asked Emma what advice she has for workers and other companies looking to unionize.
My biggest piece of advice, and the easiest piece of advice, is to literally just talk to your coworkers. That's how it all starts. And really meaning it, like form a real connection, understand what the issues are that you are facing, understand what the issues are that your coworkers are facing. Really learn about the people you work with and care about them in a real way to continue to coalition build and build these relationships and build that solidarity. If you're choosing to work towards a union, that's the hardest part in getting started, is really just like establishing and building and nurturing those relationships to be able to have that unified front and that solidarity. And so just talking to your coworkers and just starting by taking those possibly like casual workplace friendships and really understanding how your coworkers move through the world and understanding what the issues are inside of work and outside of work that are affecting them, and figuring out what you can do to change it, whether that's forming a union and having a union behind you to support you in getting a contract to secure all of these things in writing, or arbitrating grievances in the workplace, or tackling workplace inequality or harassment or whatever it is. All of those things having a union can really support you on, but also creating your own mutual aid network within your workplace, because we're all in this fight together. And the more people that are in this fight together, the more power you have and the more you can support each other.
When we're out in the backcountry, we carry the 10 essentials with us at all times, so that no matter what lies ahead, we know how to keep ourselves safe and protected. In the same spirit, the REI Union has outlined the 10 essentials for a better cooperative.
The first essential is navigation. That would be a compass or a map. For us, that is a predictable schedule so that we can prioritize a work-life balance. The second one is shelter. So camping, that would be a tent or a rain tarp or a lean-to or something like that. For us, that is what allows us to provide shelter for ourselves. So guaranteed minimum hours and a livable wage that reflects our expertise, so that we're able to provide a place for ourselves to live. The third one is a repair kit. For us, that is repairing structural inequalities and inequities that exist both within the company and within the greater culture as a whole. So that is through REI's, what they call the READY program, which is the Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion program, and making sure that that is actually being used in an effective way, and also to advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion in the greater culture as a whole. Next up would be fire. For us, that is protections and safe working conditions. So to make sure that we are not putting ourselves at risk on the job when we have shop technicians working with heavy machinery, stock employees who are moving around pallets, lifting heavy boxes. There's lots of fixtures and moving pieces and parts. So making sure that we're doing all we can to protect our health and safety. Then we go on to insulation. So things that can keep you warm and protect you from the cold. For us, that looks like job security. So making sure that we are not going to be left out in the cold gives us protections like arbitrating grievances and making sure that we have to be fired for just cause, that we can't just be willy-nilly fired whenever or laid off whenever REI decides they want to. Then another essential is first aid. Obviously, very important when you're out in the backcountry, but it's also important for us to have supportive healthcare systems and sick pay that actually reflects the reality of sickness and illness. Number 7 is nutrition. So those for us are the things that allow us to experience the nourishing aspect of the outdoors and of life itself. So that's a vacation policy or taking leave policy so that we're actually able to live a life outdoors and to enjoy time with our friends, family, with exploring the world that we live in. Then we've got sun protection. For us, that is protection from the harsh elements of life and things that will provide career longevity. So that is a retirement program, parental leave, bereavement leave, so that we can take on whatever life brings and also protect our careers at REI to be able to sustain them over a long period of time. Then we've got hydration. A big topic of discussion in the outdoors community is how much water to bring. And there's a lot of people who want to go ultralight and cut weight, and water tends to be very heavy, but cutting weight can be very dangerous. So in the stores, that looks like minimum staffing levels. It can be really, really difficult when REI is trying to run a skeleton crew to operate a store and expects us to be managing 10 different customers at once. It can be dangerous when you're doing that, when you're working in the bike shop or the ski shop, to be constantly pulled away from your work, to be distracted when you're working with power tools and heavy machinery. So minimum staffing levels are an absolute must to protect the employees and also to protect the customer experience. And last but not least, my favorite, number 10, is illumination. So making sure that you have something to light the way and guide the way. And for us, that is the vision. That is our way of expanding the union's strength and solidarity to continue to guide the way forward and to move in a more positive and supportive manner to protect employees and to just make the co-op as a whole a better place to work and to shop.
I want to thank Emma for joining me in conversation. It's clear that REI's union busting efforts stand in stark contrast to the brand's carefully curated image of community-driven values. While REI presents itself as a progressive cooperative, its actions tell a different story, one that mirrors the tactics of corporate giants determined to suppress organized labor. This fight isn't just about REI employees. It's about the broader labor movement and the right of workers to advocate for fair wages, job security, and a voice in the workplace. When companies that market themselves as responsible corporate stewards actively undermine workers' rights, we as consumers have an obligation to hold them accountable.
For workers, your greatest tool and your greatest leverage is your labor. For consumers, your greatest tool and your greatest leverage is your dollar. So choosing where and how you spend your money is going to be the biggest effect. That's why things like when customers choose not to cross a picket line and choose not to give REI their money when the workers are out on strike has a huge impact, because it impacts what is one of the most important things to REI, which is their bottom line and their profits. Their other greatest tool is literally just their voice, because the other thing that is most important to REI is their public image. And their public image is such that they are a progressive, sustainable company that cares about people and the planet over profit. So calling them out is huge. It might feel like I'm just one person who shops at REI, they're not going to listen to me. But if all of those, just one person, all of those people are speaking up and sharing their experience and offering this feedback, that's a lot of people.
We have power. We can hold REI accountable and support the workers pushing for change. Solidarity doesn't stop at the checkout counter. It extends to the people behind the brand, from those staffing the stores to each individual who touches the products we buy down the supply chain. The labor movement is growing, and as history has shown, collective action is one of the most powerful tools workers have to fight for their rights. As a member of the REI Co-op, this episode is my request for REI to hold true to the values it promotes. If you are a member, REI's board of directors vote is officially open. REI has chosen to offer only their hand-picked nominees. I encourage you to select withhold to vote against each of REI's corporate nominees to block them from joining the board. If you are not a member, please remember your voice has power too. Help us amplify the organizing efforts of REI union members and workers. You can find out more about ways to support by visiting our Instagram page or subscribing to Art of Citizenry on Substack. Be sure to visit our show notes for resources and more. With that, I want to thank all of you for tuning in. This podcast is entirely listener supported. I truly hope you consider contributing to it by visiting artofcitizenry.com/support. Please remember to subscribe to Art of Citizenry wherever you listen to podcasts and give it 5 stars. Thank you to our producer, Ali Honore, and editor, Noah Kowalski.